Hello, everybody, and welcome back to my weekly cult situation report. I am Daniela Mestenek-Young, scholar of cults, extreme groups, and extremely bad leadership. I wrote a book called Uncultured, and it is about growing up in one of the world's most extreme religious cults, the Children of God, and then going into the cult of the U.S. Army, where I was ultimately Captain Mestenek, intelligence officer, for a combat battalion of helicopters deployed to Afghanistan. I deployed twice during my career as a young lieutenant. I was also one of the first women on a deliberate ground combat team. Pretty much everything Pete Hegseth hates. And we hate him back. Anyway, you can read all about that in my book Uncultured, which is attached here, signed copies of. You can also listen to me read it to you on Spotify Premium or anywhere else you get your audiobooks. For the past 3 years, I have been working on another book called The Ulting-of-America, where we really get into everything about cults, how they operate, and how we see all of that in the military and then in our society, ultimately culminating with where we are right now. The book comes out January 20th. Pre-sales are active. They're attached here. If you get the hard copy, you're going to automatically get the audio and the digital, and we're going to be sending those out probably in November, fingers crossed. Every week in the Army, every officer sends up the situation report, SitRep, to their higher headquarters, and as the intelligence officer, mine is all about the bad guys. So, this is my report on everything that happened in the week of cults, and in my week of cults. Start with Michigan LDS Church attack. LDS, that is Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, otherwise known as the Mormons. A gunman identified as a 40-year-old Iraq war veteran, Thomas Jacob Sanford, killed 4 people and injured 8 others after crashing his truck into a Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints chapel in Grand Blanc, Michigan, during Sunday worship on September 28, 2025. Sanford opened fire on congregants and set the church ablaze before being killed in a shootout with police. Victims ranged in age from 6 to 76. 2 remain in critical condition. The church building was destroyed, but all victims have now been accounted for. And this time, it's a good time to point out that the number one thing that makes someone likely to be a shooter, the number one trait that we find in the mass shooters, is being a white male veteran. Yeah. It really upsets me these days when people say it's the guns. It's not the guns. It's the men with guns. Women have the same access to guns as men in America. And yet we're not running around doing mass shootings. Okay, thanks for coming to my second TED Talk. Authorities, including the FBI, with over 100 agents, are investigating the attack as an act of targeted violence, though Sanford's motive remains unclear. Investigators are exploring whether the attack was connected to recent threats or to the death of LDS President Russell M. Nelson, who passed away a day earlier at age 101. And if you saw, I unbaptized him into atheism. Yeah, nothing he can do about it. Ha 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 ha. Authorities well, I already got that part. There's a lot to unpack when it comes to this story. Firstly, I want to be perfectly clear that whatever problems I have with the leadership of the cult of the Mormon Church, I think it's abhorrent for anyone to be murdered in their place of worship simply because they are exercising their religious freedom. Okay. I also think it's a good opportunity to remind people that many people who interact with cults are victims of their predation. And whatever we think of their beliefs or the leaders they trust, it's not acceptable to commit violence against believers because of their beliefs. And again, like, the members of cults aren't like evil people. They are people who are being abused by an organization. This is relevant here because the person named as the perpetrator, Thomas Jason Sanford, apparently had a grudge against Mormons, according to reporting by the New York Times, who interviewed twins Peter and Francis Tersigny, who knew the suspect. He's got this whole fascination with Mormons, and they are the Antichrist, and they are going to take over the world, Francis Tersigny said. It even came up at Peter Tersigny's wedding, his brother recalled. All he could talk about was Mormons. he said, I was like, dude, nobody wants to hear about this stuff. The New York Times interviewed several people who noted his fixation on members of the LDS Church, ascribing his strong feelings to a combination of factors, including heavy use of methamphetamine and possibly lingering heartache over a failed relationship with a Mormon woman. As recently as last week, Chris Johns, a candidate for the city council in Burton, Michigan, knocked on Mr. Sanford's door while canvassing and within a few minutes found himself listening to a diatribe about Mr. Sanford's ex-girlfriend, the church, and its demands that he remove his tattoos to become a member. Sanford was also an ex-Marine who spent some time in Iraq. We know that the former military members are overrepresented in instances of violent crime. Y'all, this is just the truth. What the military does is radicalize individuals to conduct violence on behalf of state and program us to do so. And they never unprogram us, right? They just throw us back out into the world. And once again, it's significant that it's the men, the male veterans, that go on to be all violent. Okay, it's a man problem. And I don't think it's surprising to any femmes watching this that a man salty about a breakup would be dangerous. There seems to be a perfect storm here of hurt feelings and resentment about a failed relationship, grudges against Mormon beliefs, substance use, and the pressure of living life in 2025 as an ex-Marine. Even though he appeared to have moved on with his life after the breakup with the Mormon woman, obviously he had not. It's absolutely tragic that this was the outcome, and for true Mormon believers, it must have been especially hard to deal with in the wake of ... their president dying. And just to say here, you know, like, this obsession. I just saw a thing the other day that was like, is mass shooting just the new manifesto, right? These angry dudes don't just ever, like, write a good manifesto anymore. They're just angry, and 20, 30 years ago in the culture, he would have just sat there and listened to a bunch of angry music and drank too much and then at some point got over it or not, right? But now they're going out and doing mass shootings. It's the culture, and it needs to be talked about a lot more. Moving on, the LDS president, Russell M. Nelson's life and legacy. Russell M. Nelson, president of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, passed away peacefully at home in Salt Lake City at age 101, the oldest prophet in church history. The Mormon media has eulogized him tenderly, calling out that he was a world-renowned heart surgeon. He performed Utah's first open heart surgery in 1955 and helped pioneer the heart-lung machine. Over his career, he performed more than 7,000 surgeries and became a respected leader in international medicine. That's kind of cool and also interesting that a cult leader would be a medical pioneer, because cult leaders are famous for discouraging their followers to get access to healthcare, mental or physical. He was called in as an apostle in 1984. He became the president of the church in 2018, launching a historic period of change and expansion, or some might say an aggressive campaign to recruit new laborers for his cult. And I just want to point out here, when we're saying like the cult leader, I don't think the prophet, the current guy, is really the cult leader of the Mormon church. I feel like the Mormon church is a cult led by an idea. The idea being we are the one true church. And we got to go get more people in. And this is also what allows it to be passed down more easily to these variety of different men, regardless of their charisma. And this is another thing. When it's a cult of an idea, the leadership then is ruling through what we call charisma by proxy, right? Like, this is the one true church, and the church has chosen me to be the prophet. His leadership emphasized placing Jesus Christ at the center of worship, ministering with greater compassion, and a massive temple building effort, with 200 new temples announced during his presidency. And there's been a lot of focus by the Mormons to talk about Jesus more, I should say, so that evangelicals will accept them better. Clearly doesn't always work. Yes, wonder how many kids worked themselves to the bone trying to convert people to fill those pews, and also cleaning those churches, because the Mormons are really, really bad about labor trafficking, especially of the children. President Nelson was known for his global outreach, traveling to 32 countries and U.S. territories, meeting world leaders, and fostering interfaith relationships, including with Pope Francis and the NAACP. He's fluent in 11 languages and often spoke directly to members in their native tongues. That is pretty impressive. It's a cool accomplishment, but let's not overlook how problematic it is to build relationships with people who are from different backgrounds and ethnicities in order to get them to recognize your own superior faith. And let's remember that the Mormon Church has a very, very problematic history of racism, and basically the only reason that they let black men into the priesthood in the first place is because they had moved a recruiting focus to Brazil, and they pretty much had to. He was deeply devoted to family, first with his wife Dancel, with whom he had 10 children, and later with his wife Wendy Watson Nelson, whom he married in 2006. At passing, he was survived by 8 children, 57 grandchildren, and more than 167 great-grandchildren. I wonder how the first wife, second wife dynamic will play out in the celestial kingdom, where, of course, they will both be married to him. Also, that's a lot of grandchildren, and that's probably because cults love keeping women pregnant as a means of control, and the Mormons are prime among them. The LDS newsroom notes that Russell will be remembered as a beloved physician and prophet who combined science and faith in a lifetime of healing, both physically and spiritually. His ministry reshaped the church and inspired millions to follow Christ more closely. You know, I'm not sure I agree with that. And he's been the head of a church that has caused a lot of harm to members. And one of the means of harm that we always see associated with cults is suicide. And Mormon children, ex-Mormons report suicidal ideology generally beginning around 7 to 8 years old, which is when they are baptized at 8, and they are brought up in such fear of not going to the celestial kingdom and getting to be with their families that they would rather leave the earth before they can start really sinning. I believe that suicides that we see in cults also really come from the required masking everyone has to do to fit in. And you just can't live your entire life repressing your own individuality. It just breaks some people. The ex-Mormon community is pretty vocal about how much harm the Mormon Church has caused. So if you're interested in that, there's a lot of creators who talk about it. Jenny Life Take 2 is one who I really enjoy. I believe she's on YouTube and TikTok, probably Instagram. And speaking about the ex-Mormon community, it looks like Dallin Oaks is about to pick up the leadership mantle Russell left behind after his ascension, passing on down that charisma by proxy. Ex-Mormons on Reddit are not optimistic about what Oaks' leadership means for members of the Mormon community who are also members of the LGBTQ community, because he seems to be a lot more extreme than the last guy. That sucks a lot and will be compounded by the cult of MAGA similarly hostile stance on this issue. Like, it's just going to be bad. One of the good things that I seem to be telling my audience a lot is, like, the cult is cracking up. I do believe the Mormons are the most, like, dangerous cult in the world, other than probably MAGA right now. And they've done so much harm. They're richer than the Catholic Church. I mean, it is just absolutely bonkers that they're accepted at all. But as we are pulling down the systems of white supremacy in this country and patriarchy, I think, you know, we are seeing the church crack up. And the way that cults die, other than a big conflagration, is when they fail to keep or recruit the next generation. And I know this very well because that is what happened to the children of God that I grew up in. Reminder, you so want to listen to my book. You do. Oops. All right. Where am I at? And people love to tell me that the church is way too rich, and it doesn't matter if you have more money than Heavenly Father. Like, I know hundreds, probably thousands at this point, of ex-Mormons. Most of them have huge families, most of whom are not mostly still in the church. this 7th and 8th generation Mormons are leaving in huge numbers, and they will hit a tipping point. This is also true for MAGA. Even looking at veterans, right? Oh, 67%, I think, of veterans voted for Trump. Yeah, but if you filter for post 9/11 veterans, which is basically the millennials and Gen Z and Gen X, like 50% voted. And when you look overall, like the only demographic I believe that Trump carried in the last election in Gen Z was white boys. Men, but they're not keeping the children. Not to mention, women in America responded to losing health care with Roe v. Wade by saying, you know what, we will keep our legs shut, and the birth rate has dropped below the replacement rate. So the cult of America is not keeping the children either. Interesting times in which we live. All right, on to what I know you all want to hear from me. The War on Warriors, Hegseth's Purge, and the rise of the Department of War. Been making a lot of content about Hegseth's goofy but still dangerous performance in front of all the flag officers all week. But here's a recap of what Hegseth covered. In a scene staged like a convocation of the faithful, Secretary of War Pete Hegseth summoned hundreds of the nation's highest-ranking commanders to Marine Corps Base Quantico and delivered what he called the end of weakness and rebirth of strength. His address was less policy and more proclamation, an oath of loyalty to what he called the warrior ethos. The gathered officers were told that the old ways of political correctness and woke distractions had poisoned the body and the military. That era, he declared, was finished. Hegseth's purge begins with the body itself, grooming standards enforced, hazing rights restored, fat generals cast out, and physical requirements raised to the gender-neutral male level, with no exceptions. His words framed these decrees as both punishment and purification, a ritual cleansing to restore lethality. Those unwilling to submit were invited to resign, leaving only the most devoted to remain in the circle. And I'm just going to pause here and say, so first of all, the left absolutely lost their mind when this was announced. And like, that didn't have to happen. And when they noted some hours later what the meeting was about, the main thing I wanted people to see there was they could have told you that in the beginning. But they wanted you to spin out because they want you to be terrified. I'm coming down on the side of, I think this meeting might have been for the best. Because these two really showed their asses in front of our nation's military leaders. And I do not believe it went the way they expected. He justified the firing of senior leaders, including General C.Q. Brown and Admiral Lisa Franchetti, as necessary sacrifices, insisting that those who thrived under the old cult of diversity could not be trusted to guide the new order. Investigations against him, he claimed, were nothing more than the weaponized whining of the unworthy. The department itself has now been rebranded as the Department of War, its language echoing not bureaucracy, but doctrine. When Donald Trump rose to speak after Hegseth, the ritual reached its crescendo, casting himself as both patron and prophet. Trump pledged his blessing upon the transformation, promising a military that would be stronger, faster, fiercer than ever before. His vision stretched beyond foreign enemies. American cities themselves, he said, could serve as training grounds for warriors, because the nation faces invasion from within. The military, under this creed, is not merely a shield abroad, but a tool for purification at home. Okay. And none of that is the way that it works, right? What Hegseth and old Frumpy did when they got up on that stage is just really show to the whole world that neither of them understands the way that our military works, right? And military orders are much more complicated than this. So just because he said these things on the stage doesn't mean that all of a sudden these things are in place. But he absolutely is trying, right? We have given the reins of the Department of Defense to the absolute most toxic fucking kind of vet bro that you can possibly imagine. The one who's been credibly accused of rape and goes on in front of all the leaders of the military about how these are witch hunts. And he's going to bring back hazing and make sure that honest mistakes don't ruin careers. Oh, by the way, the Department of Defense's own numbers show that fewer than 1% of assault cases are found to have no evidence to support. Yeah. Yeah. They're just rapey, and he wants to make them rapier, which is so fun. When he targeted beards, if you don't understand that, that is a racial targeting of black men specifically. Shaving every day is hard on everyone. It tends to be exceptionally harder on black men or anyone that has thick, curly beard hair. So quite often, black men who spend years in the service end up with what's called a profile, a piece of paper signed by their doctor that says that their leadership can't force them to shave every day. They're not walking around with full beards. They're just slightly less shaved for their own health. So he wants to get rid of that, right? By talking about how they're going to make women have gender neutral male haircuts, right? Like, that's going to get rid of a lot of women. That's a deep level of commitment that you're asking for from a lot of women to just not only be serving in full drag all the time, the way I had to do. And by the way, we are the only modern military that didn't have women's fatigues, and he's taken those away. He wants women to commit to cutting off their hair completely, which makes us stand out a lot more in the regular culture. And it's really ironic because, like, in my day, you weren't supposed to have a male haircut because it was considered extreme. And they're all like, no trans, but, like, the women gotta wear men's clothes and have men's haircuts. And, like, it just is so ridiculous. Dangerous, but ridiculous. He's absolutely trying to yank the military back to the 60s. I don't think not one of those generals wants to help him. Even the ones that might be MAGA gotta just despise him, because the military is all about rank and hierarchy, and he is the absolute motherfuckingest DUI hire ever. And, like, when you have to announce that what you're drinking is coffee, it's definitely not coffee. It's the same as when you say this is not a cult. Like, no, this is not alcohol, I swear. Like, it's definitely alcohol. Okay. The convocation itself carried the weight of secrecy and initiation. Generals were summoned on short notice, stripped from their posts, and flown in without knowing why, only to be delivered this vision of reordering. The price, as with all rituals, was steep. Hundreds of thousands. I heard the estimate was $30 million. At the cost of the taxpayer, the looming threat of a government shutdown that could leave 2 million troops working without pay, although in reality, they never stopped paying the soldiers. And the unspoken understanding that resistance meant exile. By the end of the gathering, the message was unmistakable. The warrior order has been declared, the Department of War reborn, and only those who embrace the ethos will march forward. The others will be cast out, their names remembered only as an examples of weaknesses that had to be purged. In other words, Hegseth is embracing his true calling as a manosphere influencer and peddling absolute garbage to people with way more experience in warfare than him. And I've really been loving the military's response of just, like, showing all these badass women doing things in a bunch of videos on social media, which is amazing. If you're new around here, as former captain in the U.S. Army, I talk a lot about how the military is really very culty, and I have written 2 books about it, my own personal experience and a research book. While I think it's horrible and inhumane, Keg's Breath seems to think it's the best part of the whole operation, like the culty part. Yeah. And this is a case of 2 things being true at once, because, like, his comments are going to make life harder for women and minorities in the military in small ways and large ways, and that sucks. And also, this is not how it works. And My talent manager wants to tell you that she laughed out loud watching excerpts of his speech because it was so over the top silly, like a little kid playing dress up like a grown soldier, which is pretty much exactly what you get when you put a major from the National Guard into the position of Department of Defense. Like, I could not be more woefully underqualified to be the Secretary of Defense, and I have far more military experience than he has. Like, just, oh, it's just so unserious. Oh, and by the way, he was once kicked out of his reserve unit for having Christian nationalist, extremist, racist tattoos, right? Like, he is literally the worst kind of guy, and that's who has the reins. But maybe this all needed to happen to actually, like, break things and pull it down and fix things. I'm very sure the next Secretary of Defense will be like, put it all back, y'all. At least we can hope. And let's remember, even his own mother wrote him a letter about how he is a horrible, horrible, worst kind of man. Okay. The Kingdom of Shadows, a church that enslaved its followers. Beneath the opulent facade of mansions, luxury cars, and gleaming gold, a dark hierarchy thrived for over a decade. Michelle Brannon and David Taylor, leaders of the Kingdom of God Global Church, are accused of orchestrating a sprawling forced labor and money laundering operation that ensnared at least 57 followers across 5 states. Devotees were coerced into ceaseless unpaid work at church call centers, living in squalid, overcrowded conditions, cut off from friends and family, and subjected to mental and physical abuse. A ritualistic submission to the authority of the church. And I remind you, cults are always about labor. There's always a product or a service that a cult produces, and it is always organized crime. And by the way, if you want to go after a cult, that's the best way to do it. Court documents reveal lavish indulgences for the leaders. Gold bars, exotic cars, life-sized stone statues, designer clothing. A grotesque contrast to the deprivation of their victims, because the cult leaders are always usually living high on the hog. Text messages and testimonies show the ruthless discipline imposed on anyone who faltered, with Brandon commanding followers to be raked over the coals and threatened with death for missing quotas. Brannon had a bond hearing this week in Michigan and is now free, despite prosecutors' warning of her potential to manipulate witnesses and flee, and emphasis on the dangerous hold she once commanded. Interestingly, since her lodgings are paid for by members of the church in some capacity, a judge has given her 30 days to find living arrangements that are in no way supported by church members. Meanwhile, the church continues to operate, chilling reminder that even as leaders are exposed, the machinery of control endures. This is not simply a story of crime, it's a portrait of a cult's empire built on fear, devotion, and exploitation, where luxury for the few demanded suffering for the many. Now, very often when it is a cult of personality, as this sounds to be, when the leaders are removed, the cult might fall apart. But that's usually when the leaders are removed through death and not through government intervention and going to jail. Keith Raniere and Warren Jeffs of NXIVM and FLDS, respectively, still have many followers. Warren Jeffs still runs the FLDS from prison. And Keith Raniere still has many devotees. But a lot of times that organization, that power structure that is built, falls apart. That is what I predict will happen if we get the big, beautiful burial. However, there is the potential for someone else to step in and take control of that power structure because it has been built. All right. So we've already talked a lot about the cult of MAGA, but my admin, Megan, had some notes on the government shutdown. The White House warns shutdown threatens the nation's lifeblood. Democrats are held responsible, of course. A dire memo from the White House paints a chilling picture. Every week of government shutdown bleeds $15 billion from the U.S. economy, with a month-long freeze adding 43,000 unemployed to the rolls. The Council of Economic Advisors warns that vital programs from Social Security to WIC and Head Start face cascading disruptions while federal employees endure furloughs or unpaid work. In a carefully orchestrated strategy, Republicans are being rallied to blame Democrats for holding the nation hostage over healthcare funding, even as an economic anxiety spreads across the private sectors and everyday Americans feel the sting. The memo signals that the longer this government shutdown persists, the deeper the impact on the country's social, financial, and governmental lifelines, and that the GOP wants the Dems to take the fall for it. It's a really great example of cognitive dissonance. The GOP controls all branches of government right now, and it's bonkers to blame this situation, which is going to negatively impact pretty much all aspects of the country, on Democrats. And yet, at the time of this writing, the whitehouse.gov website has a little counter signaling the time that has elapsed since Democrats have shut down the government. But I think this is going to have some additional brainwashing cracks, right? As did the Charlie Kirk Memorial. We've had many reports of a MAGA having cracked brainwashing from that redonkulous spectacle. So give it time, right? But yeah, they're of course going to blame it on Democrats. And if only there was like a civilized system where if one party controlled all branches of government and still shut the government down, then there's an immediate election for a new leader, which is exactly the way many other civilized countries do it. Anyway, I live near DC, so it's a mess. Okay, we have a question of the week now. Something interesting that someone has asked. Curious as to what, if anything, the leaders of military could have done when Frump and Hegseth were insulting them to their face. Thanks so much. Your content has helped. Kate. Thanks for the question, Kate. There wasn't much they could do, right? Obviously, they could have gotten up and walked out, but to what end, right? They wouldn't be automatically fired. That's not how it works, but they might have then gotten a personal grudge by the president. They know that they're just going to go back to their posts and do nothing, or now they're kind of warned about what Trump wants to do. If they had been stupid enough to do something like demand a loyalty pledge, I think maybe we might have seen the military leaders replace the president. They did not. And just sort of saying that offhand is not the same. Right? These military leaders, again, I remind you, 800 plus generals and admirals is 24,000 years of experience at a minimum. Right? They know what he's trying to do. They are prepared. And there's no version of go use the military on blue cities that is a legal order. And I do not believe the military would follow it. And every time I make these videos, people respond with like, but Trump doesn't care about legality or the Constitution. But the military does. The military that is made up of everyday Americans. Me and my friends and my family and yours too. Are very unlikely to just suddenly turn their weapons on Americans because a dictator tells them to. Especially when there's very little to really lose by not following the illegal order. And just like I assume most of you would lose your job rather than do something horrific to other people, I believe most people in the military would as well. And what's very important here is that you need a majority of your military to do military operations, right? Hegseth can talk as much shit about women and femmes as he wants, but they're at 20%. You can't run your military without women. It's not happening. That's not the world we live in. Okay, events coming up this Saturday, which is tomorrow. I will pry myself away from my Showgirl Era listening to have the Women Veterans Call. If you are a woman veteran or femme or non-binary or anything but a cisgendered man and you would like to come to our free support call, you can email admin@uncultureyourself.com and ask to be put on the list. We get together on the first Saturday of the month virtually from 10 o'clock to 11:30. See you there. Podcasts, because I have two. This week, the amazing Candy Carpenter was on our Cults and the Culting of America this week. They talked about their childhood in a Christian family band. Also, they are the daughter of a Christian Missionary Alliance pastor. Christian Missionary Alliance is what David Berg was kicked out of for being a disgusting pedophile before he started the Children of God. So we have this interesting sort of connection. They talked about their childhood in a Christian family band and how they got into the music industry because of that. They have leaned into their artistic voice and vision now that they've deconstructed. This is a super fun interview for me because I'm such a big fan of their work. Candy's music really speaks to me, has helped me with my own deconstruction. I think it will be a healing and meaningful episode to so many of you. Please go check them out if you're not already a fan. Their music is all over Spotify. New podcast for Hey White Women will be live today, and we talk about white women tears. Hey White Women is me and White Woman Whisperer, and we get together once a week and crochet and knit for about 90 minutes and deconstruct the cult of white supremacy. I have a book club. We are on hiatus for the month of October. Some people thought I was taking off the whole month of October, but no, just book club. Still got to run my whole business and pre-sell a new book. We put together the book club list, and also if you're a member of book club, you just got emailed the top secret PDF of Culting of America. You get to read it first. If you're a member of book club, you're also signed up through Patreon, and I am loading very quickly, hopefully, all of the next parts of Culting of America. So I'm going to put videos of me reading each chapter up on there, and you get to get it first if you are a Patreon member. And you can find links to all of that in the directions here. Thanks so much, everyone, with the GoFundMe. We're very close to our goal, and I have put a lot of money and resources and time into the Culting of America, what makes a cult and why we love them. And some of you have chosen to help invest in that with me, and I really appreciate it. There is a link for anyone who is interested, but also any of you that have bought signed copies of Uncultured from me, or pretty much anything else, have been investing in this work that I've been doing for 3 years now, most of it on social media with all of you. And I'm so very excited. The book is going to come out January 20th. We're going to have a big book launch party in College Park, Maryland. And there is also a link to sign up for that. My sort of separate merch website is coming down. And so if you are still in your uncultured era and want your Not Fit for the Kingdom of God t-shirts, go get them now. We will have new cool stuff, and we have definitely heard the request for Cults Always Promise space travel merch. We have sticker pack attached here. This is Saturnita, and we're actually going to have a few to sell because some awesome people are making some. All right, song of the week. My talent manager, Lizzie, who comes to us from the music industry, has decided we all need a little joy, and music is a big source of joy around here. So we're going to start adding a song every week, or most weeks, and it's not even going to be a Showgirl song. In honor of Candy Carpenter's episode on Cults and the Culting of America, we are going to recommend their song, American Gods, and American God, I think, and recommend you do not just listen to it, but definitely watch their music video on YouTube. And now for some nitpicking. I mean, first of all, welcome to my Showgirl era. I have so many good outfits in store for you. In fact, we're going to read about whether being a Swiftie is a cult. Because of course I wrote about that in my book. Okay. Whoops. Need my knitting back. Fandoms are one of the clearest illustrations of collective energy that could tip in either direction. If you've ever screamed the bridge to your favorite song with a stadium full of strangers, you know the power. The rituals, the hashtag, the shared language that only makes sense to us. It feels like home. But that intimacy can quickly shift into conformity. Suddenly, there's right and wrong ways to be a fan. A hierarchy of who's real. An expectation of loyalty that leaves no room for critique. Research has shown that high levels of celebrity worship are associated with obsessive behavior, fantasy proneness, and blurring of personal identity and attachment-related traits. Psychological dynamics that can lead to a blurring of personal identity with that of the admired celebrity, sometimes described as identity merging. Parasocial relationships, those one-sided emotional bonds with people who don't know you exist, aren't inherently harmful, but they can blur boundaries, become obsessive, or be exploited by brands, influencers, or cultish figures to sell products or ideologies. These ties can even influence financial decisions. Recent research shows that emotional resonance with internet celebrities can drive impulse buying. But here's the thing. You can be a Swiftie and not be in a cult, because Swiftie is an identity, not a group. It's a cultural affiliation, a personal label, a way of saying these songs meant something to me. There's nothing inherently manipulative about loving music, or even building your whole personality around it. The difference is the same one I always give when people ask what's the line between a religion and a cult. A religion is an idea, a belief system, a worldview. A cult is a group. Groups can certainly be powered by ideas and beliefs. Cults give you a worldview, but ideas, like identities on their own, aren't cults. And you can be a Christian, a Muslim, or a Buddhist all by yourself. Or a Swiftie. It's the same with fandom. You can be a Swiftie in solitude, a quiet appreciator of lyrics that once held your teenage heart together. You can even have a Swiftian worldview. I sometimes joke that I was knocked off my horse on the road to Damascus by the song Tim McGraw and converted to Swiftianity. That's a Taylor Swift song, by the way, not a Tim McGraw song. Okay. None of that makes it a cult. A cult is a group that exerts power over its members in specific, measurable ways. And it must be a group to start with. You need at least 2 people. No group, no cult. That's the key distinction. Identity, even fervent identity, isn't dangerous on its own. When identity gets absorbed into a controlling system, things get, well, culty. But there is some truly concerning behavior in the Swiftie universe. Obsessive online sleuthing, full-scale doxing of critics, refusal to tolerate any hint of nuance or dissent, digital dogpiling that turns an offhand comment into a days-long character assassination campaign. And then there's the monetization. The multiple album variants with one different Polaroid or bonus track, the merch drops, the parasocial intimacy wrapped in capitalist brilliance. It can all feel intense. Cult adjacent, even. But intensity alone doesn't make a cult. Neither does passion. What matters is the presence of a group exerting control. If Swifties ever start requiring loyalty pledges, cutting people off from their families, or punishing them from listening to Olivia Rodrigo, then we'll talk. Until then, it's a fandom. Maybe a very committed one, maybe a little unhinged at times, but not a cult. Not yet, anyway. I think one of the edits I put in here was, until Swifties are picking up glitter after the party for free. Identity isn't a cult. What makes something a cult is the level of control and harm it causes. Fandom isn't a problem unless people within it are acting abusively. The same goes for identity and affinity groups. Whether it's a choice like political affiliation or niche hobby interest, or something you're born with, like race, sexual or gender identity, or neurodivergence. Affinity groups based on shared identities support individual expression and empower their members. They allow disagreement and evolution. Cults, by contrast, demand conformity, suppress dissent, and often punish departure with emotional, social, or financial consequences. Understanding this distinction is vital. When we conflate interest or identity-based communities with cults, we risk undermining the value of genuine connection. And worse, we risk demonizing a whole group of people. So, there's your snippet of Ulting-of-America. Coming soon. All right. And now for some nitpicking. Okay. So, first thing I'll tell you about, knocking a bunch of things down, the Crochet Along With Me class. So, people lost their minds for this shirt. So I'm now crocheting another one row at a time, and making little videos on how to do it. And you can find those in my knitted and crocheted items. And you can take as long as you need to learn each part. I'm giving you the terms so you can go search them and learn the basics, etc. All right, here's some jewelry that I've made. This one. Here's I'll say it's not that me, but I think it's pretty. And I made a little cuff to go along with it. And then this is a random cuff that I'm probably not going to sell yet because I need all the purple in my life. Here is the Aurora Borealis coat. It is done. It hasn't been cold enough for me to wear it yet. So I have to send it off to its home without really properly appreciating it. But there you go. Big old coat. Here's my newest invention, where I take a scarf and crochet it together and turn it into sleeves. And no, I don't need you to tell me again that I didn't invent a shrug. I might be the first one to do it out of crochet. And when you're not wearing it, a little purse decoration. You just tie it there. It's very cute. Here we go. This is part of my Halloween costume, where I'm going to be a psyop, or knitted Carmen Sandiego if you're not following the psyop drama. And I cut off this dress. I'm using the front of it for tassel earrings. I'm using the back of it for the skirt cape that's going to be surrounded in fuzzy yarn that's going to attach to the jacket. And then this dress I will wear underneath, at least for trick-or-treating. And it's got fun, funky yarn down at the bottom. And that is what I have for you today. Thanks for being a part of my cult situation report. Yes, I know the outfit is glorious. Have a day, friends. Stickers attached.